about that. Just to get started, my name is Sarah Nardini. I will be, as Casey mentioned, thank you Casey, leading our session today on resource management model comparison. So just before we get started with resource management models, I wanted to give everyone an update on some news. As you guys may have been seeing the slides so you couldn't hear me, we are having some OpenAir user groups. Our user group in Boston is sold out, which is great. We do have another one upcoming in Washington, D.C. on June 13th, so feel free to sign up for that. We're holding a user group in a new location in St. Louis, so if you'll be in the area, please feel free to sign up. Our next session in our webinar series is financial forecasting, and that'll be on June 12th. Some big news we have that everyone's very excited about is TopStep is starting a UK office. So the team is real excited. More to come on that, but just wanted to give everyone some news. Last week, some of the team was at SuiteWorld and meeting folks, helping some of our clients, sitting in on sessions, so some real good feedback on that. Today, we are going to go over the approaches to resource management, some of the comparisons to those approaches, as well as
the slides. I can't see anything on the slides except Jody's picture.
Oh. All right.
This is Casey. I'm able to see the slides. Is anybody else having that issue?
No, I'm able to see the slides. This is Mubin.
I can see the slides.
Okay.
We can see the slides here.
Okay, so whoever, sorry, if you're having that issue, you might want to close that browser window and reopen the link. That may help.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, sorry. So in our agenda today is approaches, some comparisons of those approaches. We're going to go over the difference between booking versus task assignments and the different types of resources and a few very high-level reports. All right. So there are two basic models in resource management. And what we call them is our centralized model and our decentralized model. And the difference between those is our centralized model is typically when you have a team or an individual that manages your resources. So this has a resource fulfillment process, and it also can tend to lead to more detailed tracking of resources. With a decentralized model, you empower your project managers or your resource managers to actually schedule those resources. So that's kind of the big difference between the approaches. In a decentralized model, you're going to have your resource managers or project managers manage any conflicts that arise if someone asks for the same resource at the same time for different projects, those types of things. You need to have that conflict resolution process in place as well as an escalation process if needed. And decentralized can also lend itself to more simplistic tracking depending on how you're going to implement that model. Okay. So when you think about these models, you have to really think about what's right for your organization because neither is really technically preferred. It's just what you need. So what objectives are you trying to resolve? What are you trying to get in place? What type of reporting do you need? And how is your organization structured? What are they currently doing? And when you think about it, you want to think about kind of how people acclimate in your organization. So in some respects, you can do some small steps. Looking at, for example, if your organization is currently using spreadsheets and they may be using different types of spreadsheets, it may be a phase one approach to just get them to move to a standard process within the tool. And then a phase two approach could be looking at a centralized process using a booking request fulfillment process, implementing booking types and so forth, which we'll go through a little bit later. But it might be best to look at baby steps depending on how change management works within your organization. Also, another thing to consider is your structure. So if you have resources that are shared cross-functionally, sometimes that lends itself better to a centralized process, so you can have someone that leverages resources across, understands skills, and so forth. In a decentralized process, you can look at, it can be a little bit easier to manage siloed resources. For example, if you have let's say your organization has a security practice, and in that security practice, the resources in that practice are only used for security projects. Well, that makes it a bit easier to manage those resources. People will only obviously pick security resources if they're using a security if they're on a security engagement. Some clients have that type of siloed resources, others don't. So it really depends on how your organization is structured. Also, when you really keep in mind that change management process that I was mentioning, because if you don't have that strength in place and you don't have the ability to manage that data or drive that change, you're going to have problems with folks acclimating, and it may not be the tool or how you're looking at using it. It just could be, what do you need to do to get from point A to point B? So those are some big things that you want to consider. Okay? Here are some of the differences between, when you're looking at centralized versus decentralized. I mean, the most important thing is just having a process in place, understanding how you're going to make sure you give people timely responses, make sure you understand how you're going to manage those conflicts, and then who's going to manage the data entry and the data maintenance. Is obviously you want to have good data in so that you can get good reporting out of that tool, and you don't want to be overly burdensome. Both models will provide reporting. It's just the level of reporting you're looking for. And with both models, you can use booking types if you want. And by booking types, I mean when you're thinking about soft bookings, hard bookings, or confirmed, that type of thing. But there are different ways to look at that. So, all right. So in a centralized model, as I mentioned, that's typically when you have someone that's managing that pool of resources. And it does have the ability to use an automated workflow using the booking request. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. We'll walk through that briefly inside the tool. And that is the type of automated workflow that you can use to, if a project manager requests a resource, then someone can fulfill that resource request. In this, there's a bit more administration around using a centralized process, because there are more people involved in that process typically. The one thing that we have heard around centralized processes is when you have a resource management team, they may not be as in tune with the project details as a project manager would be. So that's something to definitely think about. Also, as I mentioned, it's a little bit more burdensome with the amount of data and the amount of people involved, but it really depends on what you're looking to do. So when you look at, in a decentralized process, there's really no team. It's your project managers. You can basically make sure your project managers are equipped to handle that conflict resolution. Also, with the decentralized, you can either enable them to book resources directly in the projects module in what we call a booking grid, or they can use the resources module. Okay, and I'll show folks that. The big thing about using the booking grid is basically it doesn't allow you to easily use booking types. So if your organization is looking to use booking types, like considering something that a project that maybe isn't signed yet as a soft booking, considering a project that's already gone live and is approved, a hard booking, something of that nature. So instead, maybe you can look at project stages instead of booking types if you're using the booking grid. And I will show everyone that. So I'm going to just log into the tool really quick so that I can help you understand what I'm talking about. So basically, our booking grid, if you go into projects here and you pick your project, in a decentralized model, you can use this function called a booking grid, and it's under personnel. And you can set up your booking grid weekly, monthly, quarterly, and a time period for that. So let's go with a weekly. And as I was mentioning, what happens is you can copy resources and hours from another booking if you want. And basically right here, this information to copy, and you can select a project to copy from. But this booking type, what I was mentioning is basically you'll select a booking type in this form, and that will, all of your bookings will default to that type. So you don't have that ability to use different booking types across the resources. So that's the big difference with using the project grid. However, you could make some assumptions that basically suggests that if a project's in an opportunity stage, it's a soft booking. If a project's in an active stage, it's a hard booking. So, depending on how your organization functions. So then, once you save that booking grid, you can come here and you can enter those bookings. The big thing to note is when you think about this, you want to either use the project booking grid or use the resources module. You don't want to use both because that could create some overlap and some data integrity issues. So I'm just going to enter 10 hours for Graham and then 5 hours for Layla here. And hit save. And then my bookings are saved for that project. Okay, just that simple. To enable the booking grid, I'll just show you where that is. You're going to go to the Global Set Administration. You're going to go to Application Settings. And under Project Settings, when you go to Project Stages, you can pick the stage in which you want to enable that booking grid. So for example, if you pick a project stage that we call Live, which is an active, signed, approved project, you can see here that this booking grid box is checked, and that will enable the booking grid to show up in the project module. Okay? So save that. So we're going to move back to the presentation now. And here, that was decentralized. So just to quickly go over what is a booking. A booking is just an OpenAir term that it's just what you do to schedule resources. That's all a booking is. It can be, some folks call it an allocation. Basically, it's just the effort, whether you can enter that in hours or percentage, the effort for the project. So bookings will help with support T&M forecasting. The term booking, as I mentioned, may be changed. And you really want to manage your bookings in order to get good data and get good forecasting. You really want to manage your bookings as your project moves and changes, because as we all know, as a project goes on, you may have assumed you were working 40 hours in 1 week, and you may have only worked 10. So if you still need those hours, you want to push them forward. It will be important to kind of define that process, the timing you want to perform that process. So let's say you want to tell all of your project managers or your resource manager to make any updates to their bookings by Monday at 10 a.m. So if you pull reports, you know that it's the most recent, right? You know what your process is. You know when to pull those reports. Or if you're scheduling reports to come to you, you can do, you want to pull them all on Tuesday, something of that nature. So just important to understand your data maintenance process. Bookings versus a task assignment. Both can be implemented. The bookings are meant to drive your project schedule. The task assignments are meant to limit how many projects you see and how many projects folks can post to when they're entering their timesheets or expenses. So that's really the big difference. If you have a lot of projects, it's good to limit. You can also use a process where you can only assign folks that have already been booked. And I'll show everyone that real quick as well in the tool. So in our tool here, what you can do is when you book a person to a project in our application settings, under project settings here, you'll go to other settings, and if you scroll down, there is this drop-down menu that's basically suggesting who you can assign to a project. So if an organization isn't using bookings, or they're using bookings they've just started a pilot program on that, you can do booked users or all users if none are booked. But if you really, in order to keep things in sync, if you're booking folks to a project, you probably want to make sure that only those folks can be assigned to a project. So you would just pick this booked users, and that will limit who you can assign to a project. Okay. All right. So moving on. Oh, my apologies. I apologize, folks. So then booking entries. There's a couple different ways to enter bookings. It really depends on what you're doing. If you just want to enter one booking for a single project, there is a one new booking feature. If you want to enter multiple bookings, there's a grid view, it kind of looks like an Excel spreadsheet, and I'll show you guys that. And you can enter multiple bookings, so you don't have to go one by one to enter your bookings. Okay? And there are different types of resources you could book. So these are named resources or generic resources. Named resources are typically resources within your organization that you've already identified. The purpose with generic resources is just to have a placeholder that will identify a staffing need. All right. So let me go back in here, and I will show everyone how to enter a booking. So with bookings, what we want to do is we want to go here to our resources module. First, I'm going to show everyone, we're going to run through the process for a centralized, if you're using a fulfillment process. So what you would do is you can enable this bookings request feature. And what you can do is click on your green plus icon here, and that will allow you to do a new booking request. Okay? So then, in a booking request, you can select your resource, or as I mentioned, you can select a generic. But let's just say we're going to select Graham Hall here. We're going to select our project that we want to book Graham on. The timeline. So let's go with NetSuite. And you can either do percentage of time or hours. I'm going to do hours here. And the booking type. And then you just hit Save and Submit. And like timesheets, that'll route it for approval. Okay? Then you come over here. And I'm going to look at Graham Hall here. And because I own the project, it's defaulting back. It automatically approved it. So here's our booking request. Here's the approval status. And we want to change this to confirmed because it was in request and didn't pick that up. And that means that then so basically in theory it would go to a resource manager if it was central, and it would then have this individual booked to this project. Okay? So that's a real easy feature of the booking request. The big thing with the booking request is if you tend to look at a booking chart, the requests will not appear on a booking chart because they appear by booking type. So they won't appear until you actually put a booking type. So some people don't like that, some people do. It really depends on what other functionality you're using. So if you're not using these booking requests, or even in a decentralized capacity and you want to enter new bookings, as I mentioned, for a single booking, you can come in here under Resources Booking Requests. You click on New. You pick your resource, very similar to what we just did. You pick your project, time frame, percentage of time or hours, the booking type, and then you just hit Save. And that new booking is created. to enter multiple, which is nice if you're managing a number of resources, or if you're a resource manager, you want to enter a bunch of different bookings, you would hit this new multiple, and it gives you this grid view, which will allow you to pick different resources across different projects, across a different time frame, and you can book in hours or percentage. You can select your booking type and then save them. So that's really user-friendly if you're looking at booking more than one resource. Okay. So then you also have, I tend to like this list view because it just shows me all the folks. I can select my projects. You can customize your list view in here. I'm sure a lot of you OpenAir users have seen this before. You just customize your list view and what you would like to see. But I tend to like it. It enables you to easily modify or edit a booking. It also enables you to sub in and out people, and look at this chart here that tells you what their bookings might be booked or if they're overbooked. Please keep in mind this is our sandbox environment, so my apologies if there's not a lot of data in here. So that makes it nice. There is also a grid view if you like that, and you can kind of set your time frame here on the bookings grid. And just another way to look at it. In our bookings charts, there's a couple different types of charts you can create based on what you want to look at. Your bookings versus your overage, your color-coded by time frame. And if you hover, it shows you some additional information. But it really just depends on how you're used to looking at the information. This planner is something new. We are still testing it, but it's got this interesting feature of drag and drop, which we haven't seen before. That's new in the most recent release. So you can, instead of going back and forth to move columns, you can just drag and drop things around, which is nice. And for those of you who have used any of the Salesforce CRM projects, it has some drag and drop functionality. So just something, there will be more to come as we continue testing this functionality. Okay? So back here to our presentation. A little bit about, so as I mentioned earlier, you want to look at what model you want to use, and that will help you to define how you want to track the data and at what level you want to track the data, and that will lead to how you're going to be able to report on that data. And when you look at it, there are a couple standard reports that a lot of our clients use, and it's the utilization reporting, bookings versus actual, and our forecast report. Most people are doing these. I just happen to be doing them manually, and this just gives you the better the data is managed and maintained into the system, the ease of use you have in pulling these reports. So utilization, you can look at it a couple different ways. The biggest thing is to understand and define how an organization defines their utilization. What are the hours per year? What's included in the utilization? Is it billable utilization and something called productive utilization, which may be projects that aren't client utilized, but you still get utilization credit because it's been decided by the organization that folks are allowed utilization credit. And there's also the ability to look at utilization in hours or percentage. And if you set up utilization targets by user, you can look at a target versus actual comparison, which can be very helpful when you want to understand how folks are tracking. So bookings versus actual. As we looked at our bookings in our system, we want to compare those to how actual time has been posted into timesheets. And this just shows, maybe how are we doing with forecasting our bookings, where do we need help, what types of projects are we good at, what types aren't we, that type of thing. And we can look at this by employee, by sub, however. All right? And a forecast report. So forecast reports I find can be very helpful And it really is, there's one dependency on charge projection. So not just the bookings that you have entered, but also how you have the charge projections functionality set up. So the charge projections functionality essentially defines what you're going to use and how you're going to run, let's say, for example, you use bookings, how those bookings are going to be run through if you use revenue rules or billing rules. And I'll show you where that feature is and how it can be set up. But basically what it does is says, okay, you have 5 hours booked, you have these revenue projections, your revenue rules, it will run those 5 hours through those revenue rules and give you a forecast for the future. So you can forecast future revenue. It tends to be very helpful when you're doing projections for a finance organization or something of that nature. So let me just show you a couple quick reports in the tool. So I just set up a few reports, and we have a target versus actual hours, and the targets, just in case folks aren't using those, are set up in here in this administration, and in your user record. Go to users. I don't know why I'm not seeing any of my users, but in the user record, you will have a target utilization feature, and that's where you can store your utilization percentage for each user. All right. So we'll go back over here. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why it's showing it. We're going to go back over here to this report. And so basically, George has, this is a percentage, 100% utilization target, and he's achieved 0%. It calculates the target in hours, billable hours, and then we have a variance to target. And a lot of you have used the reports, I'm sure, before, so you can modify this time, the time periods, month, year, whatnot. But I find that it's helpful for folks to have these targets in here to do some variance analysis. As far as bookings, as we've been talking a lot about bookings, our bookings versus actuals, this also will show assignments. And the point here is to basically show how we're tracking. And I'm going to scroll down real quickly. So on our project called Jody's Test, we have 27 assigned hours versus only 20 booked hours and no actuals. So looking at that leads us to ask the question, okay, what happened? What do we need to move forward? Why do we have more assigned than versus booked hours? What's kind of going on here? So that is what helps here, and it also helps us to understand how well we're forecasting. It really is how well we're forecasting our bookings and hours. So we understand how we're utilizing people's time. And then we have our forecast. Our forecast, as I mentioned, leverages both bookings and charge projections. So for every project, if there are bookings for that time period, it will run your booked hours through your rules as well as your revenue rule projections. So this is based on how your revenue rules are set up per project, and it takes those hours and it runs them against those revenue rules to give you your forecasted revenue. And charge projections, just to explain to folks if you're not using them, charge projections are over here in your application settings, project settings, and your charge projections. As I mentioned, we're using approved and booked hours. There's an auto feature set up on this one, and that allows charge projections to automatically run every day. And we have our start and end dates here, and it creates recognition transactions. So that's just that needs to be set up in order for those charge projections to work, for those forecasted revenue feature to work. Just wanted to point that out there. And so that is really about it for today's session. Thank you everyone for joining today. I do apologize for my technical difficulty at the start. If you have any questions, concerns, or otherwise, please feel free to email us questions. This webinar will be posted to our website. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend.